Assalamu alaikum. How are you, my dear students? Third year students in the Department of English. Our lecture today is related to another skill. I say another because in the previous lecture we have taken reading skill. So our lecture today is related to teaching listening. So today we are going to talk about listening skill. As I have mentioned, today we are going to talk about listening skill. Traditionally, we used to classify language skills as passive skills and active skills. Listening and reading are classified as passive skills, while speaking and writing are classified as active skills, since we can observe the language learner in reading and in writing. Actually, listening should not be viewed as a passive skill. It's an active skill and an interactional process in which the listener receives speech sounds and tries to attach meaning to the spoken words. Listening is a very important activity. It is the starting point to language learning process. We cannot learn the language unless we listen to the language. The process of listening includes phoneme discrimination, in which we identify and recognize the sounds that we hear and we distinguish words. Then we try to connect meaning with words that we hear. The aim of doing this is to understand the intended message. So the listener attempts to understand the intended message of the oral text so that she can respond effectively to oral communication. In order to respond effectively, correctly, appropriately, we should understand the intended message by paying attention to the words provided in the text. Listening has been a forgotten language skill for generations. It has received little attention in language teaching and learning, and listening comprehension was usually characterized as a passive activity. We mentioned that it should not be viewed as a passive activity because it's a very important activity. Theorists realized that listening is not a passive but an active process of constructing meaning from a stream of sounds. Listeners actively attempt to grasp the facts and feelings in what they hear by attending to what the speakers say, how the speaker says it, and the context. So, in order to achieve our aim while listening, which is to understand the intended message, we have to pay attention as language learners to what the speaker says, how the speaker says it, and to the context in which the text or the message is produced. Knowledge required for listening process. Listening requires comprehension of the speaker's intended message. We should understand what the speaker wants to convey. We should understand the message. We should understand the general meaning of what the speaker says. Command over major components of the language: phonology, lexicon, syntax, semantics, and text structure. All these items are supposed to be understood by learners in order to have correct understanding of the intended message. For example, knowledge of phonology, we should distinguish the phonemes and sounds that we hear and the way they are arranged in sentences. Knowledge of vocabulary items, lexicon means vocabulary items. Knowledge of the structure of the sentence, meaning, knowledge of meaning, and the text structure, which means the grammatical structure. Is this enough? No. We need also socio-cultural competence, which is knowledge of the social situation in which communication takes place and the social relationship between participants. Strategic competence, which indicates the ability to understand the intended message in spite of the lack of knowledge or certain gaps. Sometimes learners cannot understand everything, but they should be able to understand the intended message. Discourse competence, the ability to understand grammatical and meaning connection of the sentences included in the text. Here we have important items that we will explain how to teach listening. First, we have bottom up versus top down listening, listening text, listening sources, pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening. So here, when we listen, we either have bottom up or top down. We will explain the difference between them. We listen to text from different sources. The listening process is divided into three stages or three phases. Pre-listening, while or during listening, and post-listening. First, we start with bottom-up versus top-down approaches to listening. In the bottom-up model, it emphasizes the decoding of the smallest units, phonemes, and syllables to lead us toward meaning. So, here we mentioned that we have phoneme discrimination. We understand phonemes and how phonemes are used to produce words, and the words are divided into syllables. We should also understand syllables. The aim of this is to understand meaning. So we start from the small units, from the details, in order to have understanding to the to the meaning of the text or of what the speaker says. In the top-down model, we use the information that we have taken in the bottom-up, the details, in order to have a complete understanding of the whole text. The top-down model emphasizes the use of background knowledge to predict content, to understand content. Of course, the background knowledge with connection to the emphasis upon the smallest units like phonemes and syllables. So this is in relation to the two models of listening, bottom-up and top-down. In relation to listening sources, we listen to the target language either from teacher's talk. The teacher gives the instruction in the target language, reads the text, produces the language, and the target produces the target language. And in this case, the teacher is a source. Or from other students, we listen to other students. We should understand them correctly and provide the appropriate response. Guest speakers, textbook recordings, the audio material provided in the textbook, which is very important, especially in Iraqi schools. We have the audio material to be included in the lesson, so the students should listen to the audio material related to the textbook. Also, we can listen to television videos, DVD and radio, songs, and the internet. These are different sources. In the first group of sources, teacher talk, students talk, guest speakers, and textbook recording, listening takes place inside the class. While in the second group, in which we have television, video, DVD, and radio, songs, and internet, these sources are available outside the classroom. So we can listen to the target language using these sources in order to develop our listening ability as language learners. This means that listening can take place inside the classroom and outside the classroom. It depends on the way that the learner wants to develop listening skill. The learner selects the appropriate way and listen to the target language. Now we come to the listening process, which is divided into three stages: pre-listening, while listening, post-listening. We will understand what is supposed to be done in each stage and what are the strategies that can be applied in. First, we have a pre-listening phase. Sorry. Pre-listening activities are required to establish what's already known about the topic, to build necessary background, and to set up or to set purpose for listening. Students need to understand that the act of listening requires not just hearing, but thinking. The difference between hearing and listening is that we have thinking. During the process of listening, we have thinking, as well as good deal of interest and information which both speakers and listeners must have in common. So, during the process of listening, we should think about the meaning of the text. At the same time, we should pay attention to what we are listening to, and we show interest in the information provided by the speaker. At the same time, we have shared knowledge that should be, this shared knowledge is related to both the listener and the speaker. Shared knowledge helps the learners or help listeners and the speakers to understand each other. And if I know information about you, I can understand what you are saying in a better way. This is the meaning of shared knowledge. Strategies to prepare for listening skills. First, we have activate existing knowledge. Students should be encouraged to ask questions. What do I already know about the topic? From this, teachers and students can determine what information they need in order to get the most form of the message. So, we have discussion about what the students know about the topic. This discussion takes place before listening to the text in order to determine what information the students need to know, any additional information they need to know in order to understand the text in a good way. Students can brainstorm, which means they can exchange ideas, suggest different ideas, think about different ideas, discuss, read, review film or photos, and write and share journal entries, write notes, and share them. So all these activities are done in a pre-listening process before listening to a text in order to help the students to listen to the text and understand it in a better way. Review stutters for listening. Teachers should stress the importance of the audience's role in a listening situation. There is an interactive relationship between the audience and the speaker, each affecting the other. This means that the teacher should attract the students' attention to the idea that the relationship between the speaker and the listener is very important. Uh, and as I have just mentioned, the shared knowledge is important for better understanding. That's why the speakers are supposed to speak clearly to indicate the message clearly in order to help the listener to understand it in the correct way. Other important idea that should be done in the pre-listening process is to establish the purpose, why we are listening. The students need to understand what is the purpose behind listening this particular text. Generally, there are four purposes for listening. Listening for just global understanding. In this case, they listen to understand the whole idea. Listening for specific information. And listening for specific information, the students are given the idea that they might be given statements to indicate if the statements are true or false, or they might be given multiple choice items and they should select the correct choice, or they are given incomplete sentences and they are supposed to fill the gaps and complete the sentences depending on listening to the text. So in this case, the students are listening for specific information. Listening to establish a context, this includes understanding where is this, what is happening, who is speaking, and to whom. Also, the students should know why they are listening to be asked about the context or about specific information or about a global idea or the general idea of the text. Now we come to the second process, which is, or the second stage, which is listening skill and activities. This includes listening for gist, listening for detail, inferring, participating actively, note taking, dictation, listen and do. And in listening for just for listening for the main idea to understand what, who, and why. What, who, and why. So we identify the purpose of listening, and during listening, this purpose is achieved. Or and while or during listening stage, the purpose is achieved. And during listening or while listening stage, the purpose of the while listening activities is to help the learner to develop the skills of eliciting messages from the spoken language. How to understand the message from the spoken language, starting from understanding the sounds, then understanding words, then understanding the whole idea. What is the message? Good while listening activities help learners find their way through the listening text and build upon the expectations raised by the pre-listening activity. So in the pre-listening activity, they have previous or they discuss previous knowledge about the topic. They are provided with additional information that they need in order to understand the text or the message in the text. Also on this stage, we have different strategies, making and checking items in pictures. This activity is meant to ask the students to respond to various stimuli, questions, or statements by marking things on the picture. Either the students are asked to mark things on the picture after they carry out some pre-listening activity using a picture. Some activities which can be used in this kind of while listening stage are among others identifying people and things. Either the students are asked to identify people or they are asked to identify things, marking items mentioned by the speakers, marking errors, checking details, marking choice, etc. So as I have just mentioned, first we identify, or here we have listening for a specific purpose. The students are supposed to do these activities in the while listening process. Also, we have storyline picture sets. In this activity, the students are given or three or four pictures. The students then listen to a story and try to decide which sets of pictures represent the story. The students are given two stories, and each story is given or provided with four pictures. The students are supposed to understand the story from the listening or depending on listening, and then to decide which story they have listened to. Or they are required to put pictures in order. In this type of while listening activity, the students are presented with a number of pictures and then they try to arrange the pictures in the correct order according to the listening text. And the students identify the extent to which they have understood the text according to the way in which they arrange the order of the pictures. Other strategies include true false, multiple choice questions, and text completion. In this case, as I have just mentioned, the students listen to the text and they are asked to mark statements as correct or incorrect or true or false, or they have multiple choice questions and they are supposed to select the correct answer depending on understanding the text or the message from listening. Or we have gap filling, in which the students are supposed to complete sentences depending on listening. In this case, the idea should, or the text should, the gap filling exercise should be designed with few gaps. And if we have too many gaps to fill, it is advisable to help the students to complete some before beginning to listen in order to help them to have understanding of the text. The last process, or the last stage, is the post-listening phase. Post-listening activities are activities related to a particular listening text, which are done after the listening is completed. Some post-listening activities are extensions of the work done at the pre-listening and while listening stages, and some relate only loosely to the listening text itself. So, in this case, a post-listening process is done in order to check students' understanding of the text and activities which are related to the text or related to the three stages: pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening. This might include identifying relationships between speakers. It is sometimes useful at the post-listening activity to consider what features of the listening text made the relationships between the speakers clear. If we want the students to understand the relationship between the speakers, it's good to attract their attention to this idea before starting listening. So when they listen, they know that they are required to identify the relationship between speakers. So in this case, the teacher gives the students notes by giving a question or two before listening. Post-listening activities include reflecting, checking and summarizing, discussion, creative responses, critical responses. In such activities, the students are asked to discuss the text, provide a summary in which they mention the most important idea indicated in the text, provide discussion, provide creative responses, new responses. They produce responses that they have not heard before in the text, or critical responses in which they identify the any good points and let us say they try to think in a critical way about the text that they have here. Thank you very much. That's all for today in our lecture.